Welcome, friends. We're so glad to have you here. We've prepared some incredible stories that we hope you'll enjoy. If you do, and you'd like to support the channel and help it grow, please consider subscribing. Your support means the world to us. We were fools to go hiking that late in the season, but the allure of one last adventure was too strong to resist. The plan was simple. 2-day trek through the Whispering Pines Trail, a moderately challenging route winding through the mountains. It was mid-November, and while the weather forecast warned of a possible cold front, it didn't seem like anything we couldn't handle. There were 4 of us: me, Sarah, her boyfriend Matt, and our friend Liz. Sarah was the seasoned outdoors woman in the group, the one who carried a GPS and always had extra gear. Matt was the joker, the guy who brought marshmallows instead of proper snacks. Liz and I were somewhere in between, comfortable enough in the wilderness but still relying on Sarah to keep us on track. We started early, the air crisp and biting, the sky a pale, wintry blue. The trailhead was quiet, the usual summer crowd long gone. The trees were bare, their skeletal branches reaching toward the sky, and the ground was littered with a crunchy carpet of frosted leaves. "I can't believe we're the only ones out here," Liz said as we strapped on our packs. "Who else would be dumb enough to hike in late fall?" Matt replied with a grin. Sarah shot him a look. "It's not dumb if you're prepared. Let's get moving before the cold sets in." The first day was uneventful. We moved steadily along the trail, the sun providing just enough warmth to keep the chill at bay. By mid-afternoon, we reached a clearing with a stunning view of the valley below. "This is what it's all about," Sarah said, smiling as she snapped a picture. "Totally worth freezing for," Liz agreed, rubbing her gloved hands together. We set up camp a little further down the trail, pitching our tents in a sheltered grove. Dinner was a mix of dehydrated meals and hot chocolate, the latter courtesy of Matt, who'd packed an entire thermos. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature plummeted. We bundled up in layers and huddled around a small fire, talking about everything and nothing until the cold drove us to our sleeping bags. I woke in the middle of the night to an eerie stillness. The wind had died down, and the forest was unnaturally quiet. Shivering, I unzipped the tent and peeked outside. The moon cast a pale light over the campsite, and for a moment, everything seemed peaceful. Then I noticed the sky. Heavy, dark clouds were rolling in, swallowing the stars. "Sarah," I whispered, crawling over to her tent. She groaned but unzipped the flap. "What is it?" I pointed to the sky. "Looks like a storm." She frowned, pulling out her phone to check the weather. No signal. That should have been our first clue to pack up and leave, but instead she shrugged. "It's probably nothing. Let's see how it looks in the morning." By dawn, the storm was upon us. We woke to snow, thick, heavy flakes swirling in the wind. It was mesmerizing at first, the way it blanketed the ground in pristine white. But it didn't stop. "This isn't normal," Sarah said, her voice tight as she surveyed the campsite. The snow was already ankle-deep, and visibility was worsening by the minute. "We should head back," I suggested. "Agreed," she said, already packing her gear. The trail, however, had all but disappeared. The snow was relentless, erasing the path and covering our tracks. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a bitter cold that seeped into our bones. We moved slowly, each step a struggle. The once familiar trail was now a maze of snow and ice, and the trees all looked the same. Sarah consulted her GPS, but the signal was spotty at best. "We're going the right way," she said, though her tone lacked confidence. Matt tried to lighten the mood. "This is just like one of those survival shows, except we're the idiots who didn't bring a camera crew." No one laughed. The storm intensified, the wind cutting like a knife. Liz stumbled and fell, her hands sinking into the snow as she tried to push herself up. "Are you okay?" I asked, helping her to her feet. "Yeah," she muttered, though her face was pale and her movements sluggish. By late afternoon, we were completely lost. The snow was waist-deep in some places, and the cold was unrelenting. My fingers and toes were numb despite the layers, and every breath felt like inhaling shards of glass. Sarah stopped abruptly, staring at the GPS with a furrowed brow. "What is it?" Matt asked. "It's not working," she admitted. Panic bubbled up in my chest. "What do you mean it's not working?" "I mean the storm is screwing with the signal." I don't know where we are. The silence that followed was deafening. We decided to find shelter. Wandering aimlessly in the storm was a death sentence, and we all knew it. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon a rocky outcrop with a small overhang. It wasn't much, but it provided some protection from the wind. We huddled together, using our body heat to stave off the cold. Sarah managed to start a small fire, though the wet wood made it difficult. "We need to ration our food," she said, passing around a few granola bars. The hours dragged on. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the temperature continued to drop. By nightfall, the fire was our only source of light and warmth. We took turns keeping watch, though none of us slept much. At some point, I thought I heard a noise, a faint rustling in the distance. I dismissed it as the wind, but the uneasy feeling remained. The next morning, the storm had finally eased, but the landscape was unrecognizable. The snow was blindingly bright under the pale sun, and the trees were laden with ice. "We need to move," Sarah said, her voice hoarse. We trudged through the snow, our movements slow and deliberate. The cold sapped our energy, and every step felt like a monumental effort. Then, in the distance, we saw it. A cabin. It looked abandoned, its roof sagging under the weight of the snow, but it was a beacon of hope. "Let's check it out," Sarah said. The door was frozen shut, but Matt managed to force it open. Inside, it was dark and musty, but it was shelter. There was an old wood-burning stove, a pile of firewood, and even a few cans of food. "It's like someone left it for us," Liz said, her voice tinged with disbelief. We made a fire and cooked the food, the warmth and sustenance reviving our spirits. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. We spent the night in the cabin, taking turns keeping the fire going. The next morning, the storm had fully passed and Sarah was able to get a signal on her GPS. "We're not far from the main trail," she said, her relief palpable. It took us most of the day, but we finally made it back to the trailhead. The sight of my car, buried in snow but still there, was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. We didn't say much on the drive home, the exhaustion and relief washing over us. But one thing was certain: I would never underestimate the wilderness or the weather again. We were all looking for an escape, a break from the noise of the city, the stress of work, and the grind of our daily routines. It was supposed to be a weekend of hiking and reconnecting with nature. There were 5 of us: Ryan, the leader of our little group and an experienced hiker; Emily, his girlfriend and our planner; Jess, our sarcastic and fearless voice of reason; Chris, who always brought the snacks; and me, the one who wasn't as prepared as I should have been. We chose the Forgotten Pass Trail. It wasn't a name I'd ever heard before, but Ryan insisted it would be perfect. "It's off the beaten path," he said with a grin. "No crowds, no noise, just us in the wilderness." It sounded ideal. At the time, I didn't think to ask why the pass was forgotten in the first place. The first day was uneventful, almost peaceful. We started early, the trail winding through dense forests of pine and cedar. The air was cool, the sun filtering through the trees in golden beams. It felt like a dream. By midday, we reached a rocky ridge with a breathtaking view of the valley below. We stopped for lunch, snapping pictures and joking about how we were practically survivalists now. Jess even made a sarcastic comment about how nothing bad ever happens in the woods. We all laughed. We should have taken it as a warning. As we continued, the trail became less defined. Ryan had a map and a compass, but even he seemed unsure at times. The trees grew denser, their towering forms blocking out most of the sunlight. The air felt colder, heavier. "Are we still on the trail?" Chris asked, his voice tinged with nervousness. "Of course," Ryan replied, though he didn't sound convinced. By the time we set up camp that evening, the mood had shifted. The forest was eerily quiet. No birds, no insects, just the occasional rustle of leaves. We tried to shake it off, laughing and telling stories around the campfire. The laughter felt forced. That night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was faint at first, a rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on wood. I sat up in my sleeping bag, straining to listen. The sound seemed to be coming from deeper in the forest. "Do you hear that?" Jess whispered from the tent beside mine. "Yeah," I replied. We both stepped outside, our breath visible in the frigid air. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate. Ryan and Emily joined us, looking as uneasy as we felt. It's probably just a woodpecker, Ryan said, though his tone lacked conviction. Not at this hour, Jess muttered. The tapping stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, from the darkness, a new sound emerged, a low, guttural moan. We froze. What the hell was that? Chris whispered, his voice trembling. Ryan grabbed his flashlight and shone it toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but trunks and underbrush. Let's just go back to bed, Ryan said firmly. We're overthinking this. Reluctantly, we all retreated to our tents, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, we debated whether to turn back. Something's not right about this place, Jess said, her arms crossed. Ryan insisted we were fine. We've come this far. Turning back now would be a waste. Reluctantly, we pressed on. The trail, or what was left of it, grew more treacherous. Fallen trees and loose rocks made progress slow. The air felt colder than it should have for early autumn, and an unsettling sense of being watched gnawed at me. Around midday, we stumbled upon something that made us stop in our tracks. A cabin. It was small and decrepit, its wooden walls warped with age. The windows were boarded up, and the door hung slightly ajar. Who would live out here? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No one, Jess replied. Not anymore. Ryan, ever the explorer, decided to investigate. It's probably abandoned. Let's take a quick look. Terrible idea, Jess muttered, but we followed him anyway. The inside was worse than the outside. The air was stale, carrying a faint metallic smell. The furniture was sparse, a rickety table, a couple of chairs, and a fireplace filled with ash. On the table sat a single object, a rusted knife. This is creepy, Emily said, rubbing her arms. Let's keep moving, Jess urged, but Ryan was fixated on something carved into the wall. It was a series of symbols, jagged and crude, etched deep into the wood. What do you think it means? Ryan asked, tracing the carvings with his fingers. Who cares? Let's go, Jess snapped. We didn't need more convincing. By late afternoon, the forest seemed to close in on us. The trees grew so close together that it felt like walking through a tunnel. The light faded quickly, and a heavy fog rolled in, muffling every sound. Then we heard it again, the tapping. It was louder now, closer. My heart pounded as I glanced around, but the fog obscured everything. Keep moving, Ryan said, his voice tight. The tapping followed us, growing faster and more erratic. It wasn't just woodpeckers or falling branches. It was deliberate. Then came the moan. It was deep and resonant, vibrating through the ground. This time, it wasn't distant. It was close, too close. We broke into a run, panic taking over. Somewhere in the chaos, I tripped. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. When I looked up, the fog had swallowed the others. I was alone. The tapping stopped. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest was deathly silent, save for the pounding of my heart. Then I saw it. A figure stood in the distance, barely visible through the fog. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Hello, I called, my voice cracking. No response. I took a step back. The figure took a step forward. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long. Its face was obscured, but its presence radiated something primal and wrong. I turned and ran, the underbrush tearing at my legs. The figure didn't follow, but its image was burned into my mind. I don't know how long I ran before I stumbled upon the others. They were huddled around Ryan, who was clutching his leg in pain. I twisted my ankle, he said through gritted teeth. We need to get out of here, Jess said urgently. No kidding, Chris muttered. We fashioned a makeshift crutch for Ryan and moved as quickly as we could. The fog began to lift, but the forest didn't feel any safer. Every snap of a twig, every shadow, set us on edge. When we finally reached the trailhead, the relief was palpable. We piled into the car without a word, the silence thick with unspoken fear. We never talked about what happened in the forgotten pass. No one wanted to admit how close we came to losing ourselves out there, or to something else entirely. The plan was straightforward. 3 days of hiking, camping, and unplugging from the chaos of daily life. We'd picked a remote trail deep in the wilderness, far from the reach of cell signals or the burdens of our routines. For me, this trip was long overdue. For Jake, it was a chance to bond with Mia, his girlfriend of 2 years. For the rest of us, Sam, Elena, and Claire, it was just a fun adventure. Day one felt like a dream. The weather was perfect, cool but sunny. The forest was alive with the rustling of leaves and birdsong. We made good progress, laughing and chatting as we climbed the winding trails. Jake was in high spirits, cracking jokes and acting as the self-appointed leader of the group. We reached our first campsite by evening, a clearing beside a stream that looked like something out of a postcard. The air was crisp, the water icy and refreshing. While the others set up the tents, I volunteered to gather firewood. That's when everything began to unravel. I was on my way back to the camp, arms full of sticks, when I heard it. A low, muffled laugh, familiar, but different. I stepped closer, trying not to make any noise. Through the trees, I saw them, Mia and Sam. They stood close, too close, under the dim light of a lantern. Mia leaned in, her hand on Sam's arm, and kissed him. I froze. My stomach dropped. I wasn't supposed to see this. I turned away, my heart pounding, and took a long detour back to camp. When I arrived, Jake was there, laughing as he stirred something in a pot over the fire. He had no idea. I sat in silence, unsure of what to do. Should I tell him? Would he even believe me? Before I could decide, Jake walked off toward the tents, whistling. Moments later, the whistling stopped. Really? His voice cut through the quiet. I turned to see Jake standing a few feet away from Mia and Sam. The air seemed to crackle with tension. Mia started to say something, but Jake raised a hand. I don't want to hear it. His voice was calm, too calm. He grabbed his backpack and turned to the rest of us. I need space. I'll be back. Jake, wait, I said, stepping toward him. Don't go alone. It's dark. He didn't answer. He just disappeared into the trees. The night passed uneasily. No one slept well. By morning, Jake still hadn't returned. Maybe we should split up and look for him, Elena suggested. We agreed. I chose the eastward trail, the one Jake would most likely have taken. I'd known him long enough to predict his path, or so I thought. Hours passed as I hiked deeper into the forest, calling Jake's name. The dense canopy blocked most of the sunlight, and the air grew colder. The trail became less defined until it vanished entirely, swallowed by the wilderness. When the sun began to set, a cold realization hit me. I was lost. I wasn't prepared for this. I had a small water bottle, a granola bar, and my jacket. Night fell quickly, bringing with it a biting chill. Pressed on, hoping to find a familiar landmark or some sign of the trail. That's when I heard it, a low growl. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. Slowly I turned. 2 yellow eyes glinted in the darkness. A wolf stepped into view, its sleek body illuminated by the moonlight. My breath hitched, then another growl, and another. 2 more wolves emerged, flanking the first. They moved with predatory precision, circling me slowly. My mind raced. Running was out of the question. They'd be on me in seconds. The first wolf lunged. I swung my backpack at it, the impact knocking it off balance. The others closed in, teeth bared. I grabbed a thick branch from the ground and held it like a weapon, my hands trembling. The second wolf darted forward. I swung wildly, hitting it across the snout. The branch splintered, and the wolf yelped, retreating. The third wolf circled behind me, growling low and menacing. Before it could attack, I spotted something through the trees, a cabin. It wasn't close, but it was my only chance. I bolted, adrenaline propelling me forward. The wolves chased me, their snarls growing louder. My lungs burned, and my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. The cabin was old, its wooden planks warped and weathered. I threw myself against the door, slamming it shut just as the wolves reached it. Their claws scraped against the wood, their growls vibrating through the cabin. The cabin was dark and cold, but it was shelter. My hands shook as I secured the door with a heavy wooden bar. I stumbled to the floor, trying to catch my breath. The wolves didn't leave. Their howls echoed through the night, a chilling reminder of how close I'd come to being their prey. As the adrenaline wore off, the cold seeped into my bones. I needed warmth. In the corner of the room, I spotted an old wood-burning stove. A pile of logs and a rusted tin of matches sat beside it. Starting the fire was harder than I expected. My fingers were stiff, and the matches kept snapping. But eventually, the flames caught. The warmth was immediate and soothing. I explored the cabin, my flashlight casting long, eerie shadows. It looked abandoned, but someone had left supplies. A small stash of canned food, a can opener, and a dusty blanket. I ate sparingly, conserving the rations. The wolves remained outside, their snarls fading into occasional howls. I didn't sleep much, my mind racing with fear and exhaustion. By morning, the wolves were gone. The The forest was silent as I stepped outside, the ground covered in a thin layer of frost. I had no idea where I was, but I knew I couldn't stay. Using the rising sun as my guide, I headed east. The hours dragged on, each step a test of my resolve. My legs ached and the cold bit at my exposed skin, but giving up wasn't an option. Just as despair began to set in, I heard it, a distant hum. I followed the sound, my heart pounding with hope. A dirt road appeared through the trees. A pickup truck was parked a short distance away, and a man in a flannel shirt stood beside it. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice hoarse. He turned, startled, then ran toward me. "You okay?" I nodded, tears of relief streaming down my face. Jake had made it back to the trailhead on his own and called for help. He was found the same day, cold and tired, but otherwise unharmed. We didn't talk much about what had happened. Not about Mia and Sam, not about the wolves, not about the fear we'd faced. But something changed in me during those hours in the wilderness. I learned how fragile life is, how quickly things can spiral out of control. And I learned that survival isn't just about strength or skill. It's about resilience, luck, and the will to keep moving forward, no matter how hopeless things seem. That trip left its mark on all of us, in ways we're still trying to understand. For me, it was a stark reminder of how small we are in the face of nature, and how sometimes that smallness is what makes us fight the hardest.